Dave,
Nick.
see these fancy gears?
Yeah, they look like spacely space sprockets.
Do you know how long that took me to make those spacely space rockets? And make them spin like that and not have things wobble?
You forever. Our marketing department?
Yeah,
less than forever.
You know, those guys are busy. They don't have time to help me with little things like this. I got to do it myself. Gear effect.
They look like gears.
Gears.
I got us off track immediately. I'll get us back on track.
Doing great. So we're going to talk about gear effect today. It's a topic we discuss in like every single club fitting video, but never really in a whole bunch of depth. I thought we'd do the same thing.
Yep.
While two gears kind of spin together like that, the same sort of gearing works to propel a golf ball forward as well. Okay. So here's the example. First, you've got your golf ball and your club.
I recognize
they both have a center of gravity. I'm trying to highlight it with that silly little orange dot there, yellow dot. That's how it works. First, though, center of gravity defined. This is what it is. It's the intersection of three different points inside of a golf club. So you've got the depth of it, the X version, and then also the Y on how far down it goes. So does a golf ball. So if we think about those as being the center of gravity in the middle of the golf club, it would look about like that. And the same thing with a golf ball. Simple stuff. But if they don't really align perfectly, you get some craziness. So that's what this is. Spin and gear effect. The amount of gearing that you get, or the difference in what's going to happen, we'll talk about that here in a second, is the amount of club head speed, how far off it is, and then the MOI, or how forgiving a driver is. That's the little bit of nerdy stuff, but let's get into it.
You just said how a driver, this is a driver thing.
This is not mainly a driver thing. Good question.
Woods, not irons, I believe.
With the irons, the CG is so close to the face and the mishits are not nearly as severe. It almost doesn't matter up until you get to the longer clubs. Now, when we talk about center of gravity, I'm using this big dot, and I'm going to change that and move it all over the screen here in a minute. In reality, though, the difference between a forward CG and a rearward CG is not much bigger than the tiny little micro SD card that sits in your phone. It's hard to move a center of gravity very far yet. I do think out of the world of golf club design, if there's a place that they can still go with some help here, it would be to move the CG further.
So with all these crazy weights and movements and stuff you can swap in and out, you're moving it maybe the width of a pinky.
It's like your pinky, exactly. But going forward, although people talk a lot about how distance has really been maxed out, the forgiveness and how much you can move the CG around and play with that, I don't think that has been maxed out because they're only moving at the width of your pinky. All right, so here it is on the x-axis. When I'm referring to the x, we're still going with the remedial way of thinking about this, heel and the toe. It's just easier to think of that as heel-toe. This, for example, is where the center of gravity is on this particular driver.
Okay.
All right. Now notice how it's not in the middle. The manufacturers
deceiving.
They don't tell you this stuff, and it's intentionally in the heel.
They probably wouldn't sell very many drivers though if that bullseye that's molded into the face was off towards the heel.
No,
right?
that wouldn't help very much.
What the heck is going on here?
That wouldn't help very much. But now we get into what happens when you hit the ball and towards the heel and the toe. Now at the most basic level, I think people know this. When you hit a ball in the toe, it's more likely to draw. When you hit one on the heel, it's more likely to fade. The story gets more complicated very quickly though with the club head design. Because the center of gravity is not in the middle, this is in particular a way of defining the sweet spot of the club. Everything to this side of the strike, everything to this side of the center of gravity or the sweet spot is a heel strike. Everything on this side is effectively a toe strike. So you couldn't use the center of the club as the spot. You need to know where the CG is. That's why we've spent thousands of dollars on some really cool tools that help us measure every single club head that's up here on the rack so that we can tell you where that is.
If we had 3 identical club heads, so literally the same exact manufacturer, is the CG going to be at the same spot or can it even be different head to head?
No, it doesn't move around very much. It's hard to move the center of gravity. So even the difference between casting different drivers is pretty insignificant.
Okay.
Pop quiz for you, Dave. See if you're paying attention.
Notes.
All right. If the center of gravity is this green dot,
yes,
and you hit it in the smiley face, what type of shot might you expect out of that? What's more likely to happen? How's the gearing helping you?
So I've hit it a little more to the toe, so that should produce a shot that maybe curves a little bit more to the left for a right-handed golfer.
Yep.
And then, so that was both the vertical and horizontal?
No, I think just that part is
just
enough.
that part.
So relative to the green dot.
I was going to keep rambling on.
Yeah, that's all right. I know where you're going with the next one. You saw the slide ahead of time. So relative to the green shot, this is a slight toe hit.
Yep.
Now, if the center of gravity was pretty close to the face, or sorry, not the face, the middle of the club.
Middle of the club, yeah.
The red dot here, that same strike, what do you get for a result then?
Yeah, it'd be the opposite, right?
Exactly.
So right-handed golfer, it's going to fade on you a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So trying to make the draw-headed drivers with the CG closer to the center of gravity, closer to the heel this way. Gives you more tendency to draw. This would be a perfect spot for a CG or a sweet spot for someone who didn't want to draw. That's how you can use that. When you move the center of gravity, like in this picture, I've moved it approximately 4 millimeters to scale. At 100 miles an hour, you get about a 20-yard difference in dispersion of where these can go. So
doesn't take much.
Well, no, it doesn't take very much. And now some of the drivers you can move 7 or 8 millimeters. So at 100 miles an hour, you're getting much more than 20, maybe 30. I don't think it'll be an across the board ratio where that gets to 40, but it's pretty significant. Faster you swing, the more gear effect matters for the offline piece. The slower you swing, though, there's still tons of value in putting the CG where you want so that you get the right curve on the ball. Now we have the Y. Here's an example of that one. This is the vertical dimension. That's what we'll talk about as the Y-axis. So now here's your center of gravity, same spot it was before. If you hit any shot below the center of gravity, you get a shot that the club actually starts to bend. As you hit the shot, it deflects downward, so you get lower launching shots, but then the ball, because of the gearing effect, starts to spin the opposite way, and that increases the spin. Real easy way to think of gear effect that I kind of skipped over earlier would be to hold your hand out. This is your driver face, and then if you hit it low on the face, that would go down, and at the same time, the gearing effect of the ball, my right hand, would go the other way.
Yep.
So you get more backspin that direction. Easy way
so
to
I feel like
remember
there's a quiz coming. So lower on the face, lower shot, higher spin.
You got it. Now, depending on where that center of gravity is, this is what matters, not the middle of the face.
Right.
So even if I were to hit a shot right here, it is low on the face relative to the center of gravity, even though it would still be above the center.
And it may not look like a low shot, it's just going to be a lower shot. We're using relative terms.
Lower and more spin.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, so here's your little chart. If you break up all 4 of those quadrants, this is how that would look. Any shot that's hit above that line, you get less spin, more spin below it. Any shot that's hit to the this side, the heel side of the club, you're going to start to get some fade bias. And then additionally, because when you swing a club, you're not moving the whole club at the same speed.
Right.
The toe of the club is always moving faster than the heel is. That's
Right.
the way that it would close, and that's how it ultimately moves from trailing behind the sole to, or the shaft itself, to leading in front of it after the shot. So now any shot that's hit higher on the face and towards the toe gives you like almost the holy grail of what you're trying to do with your driver anyway. Less spin, draw bias, faster club head speed. And the same thing with lower, except you get more spin, draw bias, faster club head speed. So there used to be a conversation a long time ago about tour players, before a lot of this was really discussed at all.
Yeah.
Tour players would hit a shot high and on the toe, and they loved it. That was the one that went really high, didn't slice, so they knew it would curve, and then it went farther because the club head might be moving a mile an hour faster that way. So for you at home, if you do hit a shot and you hit one high and on the toe and it goes a little bit further, it shouldn't be a mystery anymore. That's just the gear effect pieces.
I see the little note here. I feel like there's a point of diminishing returns. You're not trying to go as high and as on the toe as possible.
There is. Now here's where we're getting a little bit nerdy here. No, for sure, because as the shots start to stray away from the center of gravity, you do start to get diminishing returns, and ultimately, once you get about a half of an inch past that, any shot that's hit any further over here, I can't tell you what's going to happen.
I know a few people that live in chaos on the golf course.
Right. So there's your inconsistency. So the way that I think it's important for people to get fit for a driver anyway is get the driver that you can hit closest to the CG.
Yep.
So that you don't have this wide array of total chaos. Now, one of the examples I might give for this to explain the chaos with a driver, if I had a shot out here, almost off the end of the club, the shot should, in theory, following all those rules, have the most draw bias, have some faster club head speed, and then, but depending on if it was just a little bit low or high, more or less spin.
Right.
But what happens is when you hit a shot so far off the center of gravity, if I hit it too far off, there's so much twisting of the golf club itself that in that small amount of time the ball's on the face, the ball can push to the right so far that you can't.
Even if it was curving left, you wouldn't see it. You
Push
wouldn't even
cutting.
detect it.
Yeah, you can hit some nasty shots. So anything more than a half of an inch off, and I feel like I'm almost being generous in there, starts to bring in the result that you almost can't use. So when you get fit for a driver too, if you hit a shot more than a half an inch off the center of the face, like right off of where the middle is, that would be a good starting point to know that you shouldn't be using that shot to help you with the launch monitor or help you with any of the data from quad that we're using here. It just isn't going to work that way.
And I feel like the ability to hit closer to the CG, closer to the center of the face more often is where a lot of people need to look at their driver length.
Yeah,
I think the long drivers have started to kill that for some golfers.
exactly. You've got two different avenues you can take for this model to work. You can use a longer driver and hit it all over the place and just use the tech in the driver to help you. You'll swing it faster, but you're bringing in that element of more chaos and crazy
Which is
potential
what long
in
drive guys do.
distribution.
They
Yeah.
just need 1 out of 10 to be on the planet.
Yeah, it makes sense for them. Nobody
Yeah.
who is competing in long drive would use a 43.5-inch driver. Even
Right.
if they could hit every shot on the CG, is still losing miles an hour ball speed that way.
Right.
For everyone at home, though, I would use the opposite way of looking at that. Use one where you can hit that CG. Bring this picture up because do you notice that we've got 3 different drivers in here? Ping, Callaway, TaylorMade. Do you see the center of gravity marked in silver here? How many of them are in the middle of the face?
0, but Ping is closest.
Ping is
I'd like to
closest.
point that out.
I don't know if that makes it any better. It's also the highest too in this picture, which more spin.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see how that might work
Yep.
as well.
But yeah, none of them are
None
in
of
the
them
middle.
are. And then if your coach and fitter don't understand your equipment or know where the center of gravity is, particularly with your driver, it's most important for that. You're really making it tough. Like anyone who's buying a TaylorMade driver this season and expecting it to be as draw bias as, say, a Callaway driver or your Ping, you're buying a driver that's more likely to fade than all of those. And
Right.
good luck trying to figure that out on your own. You
Yeah.
really need someone who can help you guide you
You're
through
going to be
that stuff.
slamming those weights all over the place trying to get that figured out.
Now here's a famous shot. This is from Jim Furyk at Oakmont a few years ago at the US Open, and I want to talk about how gear effect matters for him. So we're still at this remedial stage. This is like the most remedial example. I think Jim hit this shot and he realized why it went where it did, but most people don't really realize what happened. I'm not looking at it like he really tried to change his swing very much, but he hits this push draw that curves way too much. Now check this out. When he hits this shot, notice how the face of the club twists open through the ball?
Wow.
It doesn't continue to close very much.
Right?
So here's the shot itself. Started pretty much where he wanted it and just hooked too much.
Yep.
Does it make sense what happened there?
Yes.
So he hits this
Hit it
shot with a hybrid.
way towards the toe.
Yeah, well towards the
compared to
toe. So coming through the shot, he
Center
hits
gravity.
the ball, and instead of the toe of the club still closing about how it did as it was approaching the ball, it actually opens it up. The ball then twists this way, and then you've got this overdraw. He didn't do anything wrong with his swing, he mishit it. And that could be that I do struggle a touch with hybrids, especially back in like the day when this would have been shot. Because there's so much shaft and hosel over on this side, it's really difficult to move the center of gravity of hybrids far enough towards the toe where that isn't likely to happen sometimes.
Yeah.
That could have been, although we can't see it, like a really centered shot with the center of gravity slightly towards the heel, and you get that same result.
Right.
So I wouldn't say that's why he did it, because he hit it in the middle, but it is possible it was more closely near the center than towards the toe and still got that result.
Yeah. Furyk's from my hometown. We'll blame the clubs.
Sure. And he lost the US Open because of that shot. Here's one from Rory McIlroy a few years ago at Dubai. Just grabbed this off of YouTube here. He hits this shot. You can see him kind of leaning. If you don't know much about Rory's game, he draws most shots, but check out the hit on that one.
Gosh.
See how fast that face just rolled, closed,
Yeah.
and low. So that one is low on the club, slightly into the heel, and
Yep.
you'd get a shot that comes up short,
Short and
spins
cuts.
too much, cuts a lot. And there's his hit. It's still up by the green. He can still easily make a birdie that way. But there's how gearing effect happens on all your shots.
Right.
Talk mainly about the driver, but that's it. Okay, that's the remedial stuff.
Oh, gosh,
Hit
here we
one
go.
on the toe, hit one on the heel. They curve away from the target, or depending on what just happened there, you'll get some slicing and some hooking. Now we get into the headier stuff, but this is the stuff that's actually, I think, important for people to understand, at least on some level.
Okay.
What I'm really going to explain here is how far off away from the CG you hit, what's likely to happen. So there is a term we're going to use, and that is a moment arm. You've got an axis. We'll call this your center of gravity, like we did in all those other dots.
Yep.
You have an alignment of force that comes into the ball. This is your force direction. And then the difference between where the CG is and that moment of force, or that line of force, is your moment arm. And
Okay.
notice how that can get longer or shorter.
Yep. Left side short, right side long. Got
Correct.
it.
Here's how that can sort of work. So the more forward a center of gravity is, we're back into the club. Here's your CG as an example, and here's one that's further back, which is typical of how more forgiving drivers really are.
Okay.
Here's how that one works. You notice how the CG, how far away from this line of force really is. This is
Right.
close to the middle of the face,
Yep.
and it's really running up through the loft of the club. If my center of gravity is that far away from that line of force that's projected, I've got a big moment arm. That big moment arm is more gearing.
Okay.
So this shot is going to have less spin relative to if I were to hit it right here, for sure, but a ton less spin and much higher launch than the same one that's just pulled back a long way, because now the moment arm, or the difference between the center of gravity and that line of force, is really small. So while this will still produce a lower spin shot than if it were directly in line with that CG, it isn't as much as this one.
Okay.
So here's an example of a driver, TaylorMade SLDR a few years back, way back, I guess.
Right.
Had the center of gravity pretty far forward. You could hit shots that were very similar to this. You get a lot of very low spin, long hits, but miss hits had a ton more gearing than what you would expect now.
Got it.
So even like the TaylorMade drivers of today, they're trying to go low and back as far as they can. Further you move this back, you can still keep the spin down and still have a very forgiving driver that way. We'll get into that one. Rear CG creates the higher spin and higher MOI.
Okay.
Okay, so the horizontal gear effect has the same moment arm property. If I have that center of gravity really close to the face and I mishit it all, slightly towards the toe, longer moment arm, more gearing, more potential draw. Further back that goes, that line of force, which is really just equal to where the club face is pointed at this point in time, is very small, so now I get less gearing, straighter, more forgiving, potentially drivers.
Yep.
So when you're doing the math on this problem, further back you can move it is good for accuracy.
Yep.
And especially in this dimension too. Trouble is when you move it back and it goes up. That's when you get more spin. So here are 5 tour players. This is from a TaylorMade commercial a few years ago when they introduced the twist face. The twist face piece itself is not the most interesting part to me. It was really just the players talking about where they hit it on the club and where they hit it on the club on a bad shot, and then why it would make sense. So here's how you can make all of that heady stuff very practical. So
and my miss is low heel. Like that's and that's a safe shot. I think that's, you know, I'm lucky that my miss is low heel because it usually comes out pretty straight and it's not a destructive shot.
I tee it up pretty high. I hit up on it. So obviously when I don't do it perfectly, I hit it out the top of the club. Okay. So it can kind of come out like a little dead and a little knuckly. So the bigger sweep. So I'm kind of, if you look at that graphic, I'm kind of top, as we look at it, top left. I would say that would be my miss. And sometimes that brings left in.
I hit a lot out of the high toe.
Yeah.
And when I'm playing a cut, the high toe just kind of goes straight. It'll start kind of in the middle of the fairway and go straight instead of when I played a draw, hit on the high toe. I mean, it's a snap hook every time.
Yeah, it's like way less.
Hey, that's about as excited as you can get. Other than that video of you have to hit a cut. When you want to hit a cut, you got to hit a cut. All right, so let's chew a couple of these apart. We're going to start with Rory, but Dustin said something really intelligent right there, and we'll show why this is. So first, Rory says that his miss that he doesn't like is the high toe because he overdraws. So let's take a look at this shot. This is a pretty normal one for him. 3-wood, see a huge push, tiny draw, ball ends up in the right edge of the fairway. That's where that one rolled. Said that when he does miss a shot low into the heel, it just goes pretty straight. So the low heel shot lets the ball start straighter, goes lower, spins more, but really would just not curve very much.
Right.
He can live with that one. The shot like Augusta National a few years ago, number 10, hitting a driver, that was a high toe, and that shot barely got off the ground and curved 100 yards to the left. Luckily, he could still go play that thing and went on and played really nice. But there's how he understands where he hits it on the club. He can tell you what happens, but that explains why it works that way. Dustin Johnson, he's always talking about how he's trying to fade it now. This week on Sunday, he had a little bit of a hard time with that. Unfortunately, sometimes the way DJ swings with the flexed wrist and his grip turns so much, he doesn't have many characteristics that really make fading easy for him to do, but he's a world-class player. He knows how to do it. Here's a shot that he's going to hit here. This shot is something like a 20-yard curve. We'll follow the shot tracer on that. It's the curve of the ball. We're up past 10 yards right now and finish pretty close to maybe 15 yards, 17 yards of curve. His problem is that when he does hit this shot, I'll go back and watch this one more time with him. You notice how this one starts to the left appropriately, curves back towards the right, and that's his hit. Well, if he catches one high and on the toe, that fading ball flight then starts to pull draw, which is his shot that he hits the most often now when he's struggling. He doesn't really overcut as much as he pull draws.
I call those the pool crush.
Yeah, they go really far.
Ball go really far.
Yeah. And
into
gear
the-
effect should help you understand that.
Yeah.
Touch the toe of the club's moving faster, you have less loft on it, and then more tendency to draw. So he's hitting these fades out there, 323 with 15 yards of curve. I mean, they're awesome shots, but if he does that, then he hits this shot maybe like 323 with 30 yards of curve the other way, and the ball's over here in that other fairway.
Right.
So that's the nitty gritty there. So that is all things gear effect, trying to make it like basic enough where anybody could watch this and understand it. But if you do want to watch the whole video and you don't get it, just watch it again. You'll get it. I don't think I missed anything in there that needed to be said or that you can't follow. But if you're a real golf nerd and you want to know about gear effect, that should explain a lot of why manufacturers are dragging CGs away from the face and getting them as low as they can, because then you have the most forgiving but still not super high spin drivers.
Yep.
So there you go. I think we did a good enough job there this week.
That was good. I learned something. That was good.
Did you? All right.
Yeah.
So next week we'll do this again. Promise we won't miss next week. We'll be here. More PGA Tour stuff, a few other cool topics to cover, but hope you like that one.
Sounds good.
Thanks.